China challenged U.S. helicopter, a serious mistake. At 2:30 p.m. local time over the South China Sea, a single decision triggered one of the most humiliating encounters Beijing has ever faced in the air. An American Navy helicopter was carrying out a mission that made Chinese commanders extremely nervous. In response, they scrambled their most advanced attack helicopter to chase it down. But what looked like a show of strength quickly became a masterclass in American dominance. For the next 72 minutes, a Chinese pilot tried everything: aggressive maneuvers, radar locks, flares, only to accidentally hand over some of the most sensitive military secrets his country had. This wasn't just a failed intimidation run. It turned into a live demonstration of how badly China's technology lags behind, and why challenging the U.S. Navy is a gamble Beijing cannot afford. The helicopter in question was the American MH-60R Romeo. It's not flashy, but it is one of the most versatile machines in the U.S. arsenal. Imagine a flying Swiss Army knife: sub-hunting, surveillance, electronic warfare, and combat support all rolled into one. That afternoon, its mission was clear: track a Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. The sub had already been submerged for nearly 2 full days, and like any conventional submarine, it needed to surface soon to recharge its batteries. That moment is always the riskiest. It's like someone holding their breath underwater. You know eventually they have to come up for air. And the U.S. was waiting. But Beijing wasn't about to sit back. From a base in Xiamen, 28 minutes away, a Chinese Z-10 attack helicopter was launched with orders to push the Americans out. The Z-10 was designed to look menacing, with its angular fuselage and rocket pods. But looks can deceive. As it raced toward the MH-60R, the Chinese pilot didn't realize he was about to make a mistake that would expose not just his aircraft, but an entire generation of Chinese military hardware. The Z-10 came screaming into view, banking hard across the Romeo's nose at just 500 meters. Over the radio, a sharp warning blasted: "Foreign military aircraft, you are approaching Chinese territorial waters. Alter your course immediately." There was one glaring problem. The American helicopter wasn't even close to Chinese territory. It was 50 nautical miles away from the nearest Chinese coastline, deep in international airspace, where the U.S. had every right to operate. Inside the Romeo, the 3-person crew didn't flinch. 2 pilots and 1 sensor operator remained calm, because they knew something the Chinese didn't. The Romeo wasn't just there for tracking submarines, it was gathering gold. Those strange bulges and pods attached to its fuselage. That's the ALQ-210 electronic support suite. Think of it as a vacuum cleaner for the invisible world. Every radar pulse, every radio transmission, every electronic heartbeat from the Z-10 was being sucked up, recorded, and analyzed. Radar frequencies, communication protocols, engine harmonics. It was all being cataloged in real time. While the Chinese pilot thought he was flexing with dramatic passes, the Americans were quietly stripping away the secrets of his aircraft, piece by piece. Then came the flares. The Z-10 fired off 2 bright streaks in front of the Romeo. Not an attack, but a show, a kind of aerial chest thumping, the helicopter equivalent of a small dog barking at a pit bull. The American crew responded without words. The pilot tilted the Romeo ever so slightly, lowering the helicopter's dipping sonar into the sea beneath them. It was a subtle but devastating message. We still see your submarine. Down below, the Chinese Type 039 submarine panicked. Its commander ordered a crash dive, forcing the vessel downward in a desperate attempt to shake off the American sensors. But that emergency maneuver created a roar of noise, cavitation bubbles, hull popping, and mechanical echoes that spread like fireworks through the water. Across the entire American carrier strike group, sonar screens lit up with the submarine's location. In submarine warfare, noise equals death. And thanks to the ZA-10's interference, the Chinese had just handed the Americans a perfect firing solution on their own submarine. By 2:48 p.m., the Chinese pilot thought he finally had the upper hand. After nearly 20 minutes of aggressive circling, his fire control radar gave him that unmistakable warbling tone. He had achieved what he believed was a lock on the American Romeo. For a brief moment, confidence surged. That feeling lasted exactly 3 seconds, Because the Americans weren't about to sit quietly and let him celebrate. Just beyond the horizon, an EA-18G Growler, a specialized electronic warfare jet, flipped on its ALQ-99 jamming pods. What happened next was devastating for the Z-10. In an instant, the Chinese radar screen went from a clean lock to total chaos. The Romeo didn't just disappear, it multiplied. Suddenly, 12 ghost targets filled his display. Some appeared to fly backwards, others teleported across the screen. One even showed up directly inside his cockpit. The Z-10's radar had gone from precision to pure hallucination. This is the reality when outdated 1990s Russian-assisted radar design collides with modern American jamming. The ALQ-99 doesn't just block signals, it toys with them. It shifts frequencies faster than Chinese systems can react, creating illusions that overwhelm the operator. While the Z-10 pilot scrambled to adjust, the jamming had already moved to 50 other frequencies. And then came the gut punch. His threat warning system suddenly lit up, not from the Romeo, but from the full might of the U.S. carrier strike group. Powerful SPY-1 radars locked onto his helicopter, the electronic equivalent of being spotted by the Eye of Sauron. Within seconds, FA-18 Super Hornets were already launching from the carrier deck. They weren't coming to engage, but to make one thing clear, the Romeo was never alone. The Z-10 pilot tried everything. He switched frequencies, boosted power, even toggled his radar off and back on. Nothing worked. Every move he made, the Americans logged, analyzed, and adapted. What he didn't realize was that each failed lock was a gift, an intelligence treasure chest showing the U.S. exactly how Chinese systems behaved under pressure. Meanwhile, inside the Romeo, the American crew stayed calm. For them, this was just another day at the office. And they knew, within minutes, the Z-10 pilot situation was about to get even more embarrassing. Frustration was starting to creep into the Chinese cockpit. With his radar blinded and his submarine blundering below, the Z-10 pilot decided that intimidation at close range might succeed where electronics had failed. He dropped altitude and closed the gap, settling just 500 meters off the Romeo's side. From here, he could see everything. The American crew through their windows, the door gunners seated behind the massive GAU 21.50 caliber machine gun. The weapon wasn't pointed at him, not yet, but the message was unmistakable. One wrong move, and this fight would end instantly. Desperate to provoke a reaction, the Chinese pilot began throwing his helicopter into sharp, aggressive maneuvers. The Z-10 darted left and right, pitched up and down, lunging at the Romeo like a boxer trying to bait a counterpunch. But every burst of agility came at a cost. The Z-10's airframe groaned under the strain, its airspeed dropped, and its engines screamed at the limit. The Romeo, built on the rugged Black Hawk design, barely budged. It could sustain higher G-loads with stability to spare. To the Americans, the Z-10's theatrics looked less like a threat and more like exhaustion in motion. And while the Chinese helicopter tired itself out, the Romeo's sensors were busy capturing everything. Its AAR-47 missile warning system tracked every twitch of the Z-10. Its FLIR infrared camera locked onto heat signatures, 450 degrees from the exhaust ports, 180 from the transmission housing. Every hotspot was recorded in exquisite detail, creating a heat map engineers would later use to program missiles with pinpoint accuracy. It was worse than just exposure. The Z-10 was literally writing its own obituary. Every maneuver revealed turn rates, climb performance, and maximum stress points. Every radar lock attempt gave away pulse patterns and frequency hops. Every second in close contact meant more data for American systems. Data that would allow the Pentagon to predict, jam, and destroy Chinese helicopters long before they could pose a real threat. The Romeo's crew didn't need to say a word. Their silence was louder than any warning shot. The Z-10 had entered the find out stage, and the Americans were recording the tutorial on how to defeat it. By now, the imbalance between the two helicopters was obvious. The Z-10 carried a 23mm cannon mounted under its nose, an intimidating weapon on paper. But in reality, its effective range against moving aerial targets was pitiful, barely 500 meters, and even then, accuracy was more about luck than precision. Against ground troops, maybe it had teeth. Against a maneuvering Romeo, it was a coin toss at best. The Americans, on the other hand, had the GAU-21. This .50 caliber machine gun could spit out armor-piercing incendiary rounds with an effective range of nearly 2,000 meters. Each round could tear through the Z-10's thin armor like tissue paper, and the gunner didn't even need to fire. The sight of that weapon, steady and ready, was enough to remind the Chinese pilot that he was one squeeze away from disaster. Meanwhile, the Z-10's own systems were turning against him. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit. The engines were running at 105% of maximum continuous power, straining dangerously. Hydraulics overheated, servos lagged, and the airframe shuddered from stress. Every aggressive maneuver shortened the helicopter's lifespan, and the pilot knew it. But retreat wasn't an option. Back home, admitting failure could mean court-martial, so he pushed harder. 14 times he attempted a radar lock on the Romeo. 14 times his signals were jammed, twisted, and recorded. For American analysts, it was like watching someone try to guess a password by entering every possible combination and writing them all down for later use. Each failed attempt handed Washington the playbook for how Chinese radars operate under pressure. Even his last resort failed. Switching to his electro-optical system, the pilot tried to paint the Romeo with a laser designator, but the American sensors picked it up instantly. They didn't just detect the beam, they identified the model, software version, and vulnerabilities of the system. In a single encounter, the Chinese hadn't just exposed one helicopter. They had compromised every vehicle in their arsenal using the same optics. The Z-10 pilot didn't realize it yet, but his show of force was digging Beijing into a hole it couldn't climb out of. As the minutes dragged on, the situation shifted from dangerous to humiliating. The Z-10 was no longer a threat. It was a live specimen under a microscope. Every system was degrading. Hydraulic pressure dropped as the servos overheated. Transmission temperatures climbed deep into the red. Flight controls turned sluggish, resisting the pilot's inputs. The more he fought, the closer the helicopter came to tearing itself apart. And all the while, the Romeo kept its focus on the real prize, the submarine below. At 3:42 p.m., more than an hour into the standoff, the American crew calmly lowered their dipping sonar again. The message was unmistakable. We still see your submarine. Down in the depths, the Type 039 sub was spiraling into desperation. Every frantic turn to evade detection only made it louder. More noise meant better tracking. Across the carrier strike group, sonar operators now had a crystal-clear fix. The Z-10's entire mission had backfired. Instead of protecting the submarine, the pilot had doomed it. Inside his cockpit, warning panels lit up like a Christmas tree. Overheating engines, strained hydraulics, system alerts screaming for attention. The pilot flicked the warnings to silent and pressed harder. Retreat was unthinkable, but he knew ground control was watching the same radar feed he was. They could see that after 72 minutes of shadowboxing, the Americans hadn't moved an inch. For the U.S. Navy, this was a goldmine. The Romeo's crew had logged every radar attempt, every frequency hop, every laser pulse, every heat signature. They had collected the data needed to jam Chinese communications, blind Chinese optics, and target Chinese helicopters with precision weapons. An entire generation of Beijing's technology was now compromised because one pilot thought he could scare an American helicopter out of international airspace. In the end, the Romeo didn't need to fire a shot. Its calm professionalism, backed by the overwhelming power of a carrier strike group, spoke louder than any weapon. The lesson was clear. In modern warfare, noise and bluster mean nothing when your systems can't compete. For China, the encounter was more than a mistake. It was a warning shot about the cost of challenging American dominance. The standoff ended without missiles, without machine gun fire, and without casualties. But make no mistake, it was a decisive defeat. For 72 minutes, the Z-10 pilot thought he was putting on a show of strength. In reality, he was performing a demonstration for the United States Navy, handing over priceless intelligence on a silver platter. His submarine was exposed, his helicopter was compromised, and his country's technology was mapped in detail for future conflicts. The Americans walked away with everything they wanted: data, confidence, and the assurance that their systems still reigned supreme. China walked away with nothing but embarrassment. Moments like this remind us that modern warfare isn't just about who has the most weapons. It's about who can see, who can hear, and who can control the battlefield before a shot is ever fired. And when Beijing chose to challenge a U.S. helicopter in international airspace, it discovered that the cost of testing American resolve is far higher than it ever imagined. This is the message the U.S. sent that day. If you come close, you will be watched, tracked, jammed, and outclassed. In other words, there's no escape.